So my name is Debbie Perez. I am a filmmaker and a public health advocate, activist. I'm here in Puerto Rico, and I've started a podcast about, wow, I think it's about 8 years now, where I talk about Puerto Rican history, Puerto Rican culture. We go into very uncomfortable conversations around the relationship between Puerto Rico and the U.S. So, yeah, it's been years of working on that. But I think only recently have I kind of taken more of a different approach with the podcast. Yeah. I don't know if you've seen sort of my page, but I definitely started off very small and very just trying to learn myself, because I felt I did not know enough about what was happening with the relationship. So,
and you also interested in Palestine as a topic.
Yes, that's why you see over here. Yeah, no, I think the Palestine issue, right? When I think about what I knew about the history of Palestine before, it was very, very little. It was very much wrapped up in the propaganda that the U.S. had used, even for Puerto Rico, which is, oh no, we're here to help the people. We're here to help the community. We're just, it was just filled with colonial language. And so when, October 7th happened and, this kind of kicked off, by now I had enough education on Puerto Rico to understand that the U.S. is not here to save us. The U.S. is not here on, an interest of being a good savior. They're here to exploit. And so in talking to other activists, people like Amnesty Puerto Rico, other activists that are here on the ground, Madres contra la Guerra, they're a group here of mothers who protest every single Tuesday in front of the Israeli embassy. And talking to them, I realized what the true issue was. And so I'm glad that now my eyes have been opened. But I think, we're seeing globally, you go on social media, you see so many people calling out, celebrities calling out that this is wrong. So I think that there's been an awakening that's unlike anything in the past.
And what do you mean by public health?
So with public health, I did my master's in public health at Boston University and specializing in epidemiology. So what it does is, we take a look at what are the social determinants of health. So in the case of Puerto Rico, there's a major public health crisis. People think that the United States being a part, being a sort of savior of Puerto Rico helps us. But if anything, it leads to more hospital closures, school closures. There's an electricity crisis right now where there's one company that's forcing the electricity bill to be 3 times what it should be. There's just so many crises across, healthcare. And I think that people here in Puerto Rico are sort of realizing it slowly. Even the people that used to vote for the same party every single year are starting to realize, like, oh no, they're here to, the special interests of these investors that are coming in and buying up the land and trying to, so.
And are people divided about public health?
Yeah, I would say they're divided of sometimes more the parties in Puerto Rico, because I think for a long time, people have said this before me. Like I want to give credit. There have been many activists who are Puerto Rican who have been calling this out for many years, that for a long time, people have been under this sort of brainwashing that the parties here are actually working for the people. But when you really look at it, they're just a puppet government. The United States has done this across Latin America, right? They've manipulated elections. They've put in the people that will only work for their interests. And the same thing is true here in Puerto Rico.
And was this American citizenship also used as a bargaining chip?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what keeps people scared, Oh, I don't want to lose my American citizenship, without realizing that is the very reason that's going to force you out. It's going to displace you out of Puerto Rico, because you won't have a place to live here. That they're making it impossible to afford to live here. And so I think the American citizenship too, for a long time, people saw it as a good thing. They're giving us something that can allow us to have all these benefits. But when you really think about it, the only reason, if you look historically, they only did it because they wanted more people to go into war. They wanted Puerto Ricans to be drafted. The only way they could draft Puerto Ricans is through giving them citizenship. So there was always a catch, and so I think that along with, if you look at the amount of money that leaves Puerto Rico to the United States, it's much, much more than what comes in with federal funds. And people don't know that. People think, oh no, but they're saving us, they're helping us. If it wasn't for them, we would not have food in our shelves. And the very opposite is true. They're taking more out of here than they're putting in.
So there's nuclear pollution.
Oh, yes. There's a lot of pollution here as well in terms of the Navy. So the Navy was here for about 60 years. They were
Oh,
here. And so they were in Vieques. And, I think when it first started, that this was, when you think about 60 years ago, there's a very different dynamic, right? We didn't have social media. We didn't have ways to call this out the way we do now. And, we're seeing them come back. We should talk about that. But back in the 60s, they came in, they built a military base on Vieques, which is the small island to the east, and they displaced hundreds of families. They took families out, they built these things, they did a lot of testing, so the soil is very toxic. There's been elevated cancer risks, elevated cancer rates among the people that live there, and there's no, to this day, I have to check, but there's no hospital in Vieques. So the people there can't even have children on the island. They have to fly a little plane over to the mainland here and have their children here. So there's all these aspects to it. And I will say, though, in terms of Vieques, the people did rise up. And so there was a big campaign. Bill Clinton, came in, and that's another aspect of it, that we've had to work with these politicians, like the Republicans and the Democrats, these parties, but both of them work for the same ends, right? And so, I will say that at least seeing the reactivation of these military bases, we're remembering what happened back then, and we're saying that if we have to, we'll fight again.
and you said we should talk about the ways that are. What did you mean?
Sorry, the ways that the remilitarization.
Mhm.
Yeah, so right now, there's been a lot of concern over Venezuela and what's going on with Puerto Rico, and how it's being used. So much of the Caribbean too, because I believe it's Trinidad and Tobago, Dominican Republic is also part of this, where the U.S. is sending troops out to the Caribbean in order to create this false sense of, we have to combat Venezuela because of drugs. Many people have already talked about this. This is not about drugs. This is about them seizing resources. The oil tanker that was just seized, I think, 2 days ago.
To
It's a clear example. There's just
to stop
piracy.
to
Yeah,
stop Cuba from having energy.
right. Yeah. So I think there's this conversation around, why are they doing this? Why are they trying to build this by force, take these oil tankers? I think, personally, I don't have the answers, but my guess is more related to AI. I feel like this oil is going to be
Mm.
used to also surveil, when I think about all of the AI and Palantir and all of the ways that they're trying to, I feel that the oil is not so much Cuba. I think it's more about trying to control oil for other reasons. And I hope I'm wrong, and I hope that people will wake up and will not allow this. But it's looking very clear that, like, war will break out. I mean, they've already had fighter jets flying over Venezuelan airspace. So, every day we're here, we're more and more concerned about how this is going to affect us, because we didn't make a choice in this, right? We don't have a choice when it comes to whether or not to go into war. And, people do have the argument that if it wasn't for the US military being here, we'd be at risk. And I would argue that if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be at risk. We wouldn't be the center, right? We wouldn't be a target for these other powers.
Mhm. So the administration of the US wants to sell this war to the people, so they need Venezuela to attack first, so that they can sell it.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
why the provocation with the
They're trying
tanker.
they're trying to provoke. Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. Yeah.
Um, and and when you make films, like.
Oh, I do. Yes. So I'm also a filmmaker. That actually started around the pandemic. So I don't have a background in film. My background is public health. But at the time, a friend of mine asked me about making an animated film, and I said, I don't know, help. He's like, help me produce this film. And I said, okay, I don't know anything. And he said, well, that's part of filmmaking. You just try, you create, right? As an artist, you make something out of your own passion, out of your own sense of wanting to tell a story. And so with this particular story, it was called Nuevo Rico. It's actually online. You can find it on vimeo.com. But with that story, we wanted to show these twins who are in a dystopian future Puerto Rico. And so they're singers, and they go into the rainforest and they find the gods, the indigenous gods of Puerto Rico. And they end up taking this power from the gods that makes them famous. And in this future Puerto Rico, they become famous, but fame came with a cost. I don't want to spoil it, so I think people should watch it. But in telling that story, it was really about showing how Puerto Rico, even in the future, becomes this like extreme police state, right? And so we wanted to sort of just highlight a little bit of like what happens when we don't fight and when we don't, realize that we're a colony. So after I did that film, I did another film here in Puerto Rico that was about the African Orisha Yemaya, and then that also won a lot of awards. Nuevo Rico, the animation, won at South by Southwest. So once it won, I said, "Oh, maybe I should keep going." And so I was like, "Okay, this sounds like this is for me." And I just the response from people, because we don't often get to tell our own stories. We don't get to see representation of ourselves in films, and we still don't. There's very, very little representation, and very few directors out there trying to bring those stories to life.
Yes. What's the second one about?
So the second one is about more about grieving. So it's a young
Mm.
woman who comes back to Puerto Rico to bury her grandfather and deal with grief, and how she connects with the African ancestry, with her African traditions, with her mother, with her grandmother. And that one was really spiritual, so it just felt very poetic. That's also online. You guys can take a look at that one. But it's very spiritual. It's very poetic. And then we did a few more films here. I did a feature. And then more recently, the one I'm really excited about is on Pedro Albizu Campos, which was the leader of the nationalist movement. The nationalist movement here in Puerto Rico, I believe, I don't quote me on the 1920s and 30s.
Mhm.
When they started, they were advocating for Puerto Rico to be independent. And so their whole platform was about Puerto Ricans should be free. We should not have to bow down
Mm.
to the Americans. He unfortunately, he went to jail. He was tortured in jail with radiation poisoning. People can look this up. This is a real story. And he died. They literally took his voice away because they were so scared of what he represented. He represented a Puerto Rico that could be free, that could govern itself. And so they attacked a lot of people. The Puerto Rican flag that you see behind me here, this was banned for about 10 years here in Puerto Rico, so that they could suppress that movement. And so I'm excited for that film. As a short film. It's docu-style. It's a drama docu-style, and it's going to be on PBS next year. We're still working on getting it finished, but I'm excited about that because it's we just don't see a lot of films that cover these kind of stories. So
And what's the story of the police leader
which police leader? The
in the 20s? I think was it in your film?
Yes. So in the film, we also highlight Francis E. Riggs. He was the chief of police at the time, and he was responsible for a massacre that happened. And so, as a result of what happened with the massacre, two of the nationalists, two of the young people in the Nationalist Party, they went after him and they killed him. And as a result of killing him, instead of them going to trial, they brought them into the police station and just executed them. And Alicia and Iram, that they, to us, for a long time, these kind of stories were seen as like, oh, these are radicals, but they were fighting, and people can argue whether or not what they did was wrong, but they were fighting what they felt was a country that was oppressing and terrorizing them. And so that chief of police was actually assassinated. People don't know the story. It's wild. I learned it so much later in life. Yeah.
I'm from East Germany, so in a way, the shock doctrine was done to East Germany as well,
Oh, tell me
um,
that. Yeah.
by West Germany when they united.
Yeah.
Mm. And the colonialism. within the US is visible with ice, I guess.
Yeah, I would say that, that's why when we talk about the whole issue that's happening here, I do like to say that this isn't just an aspect of like one place and this time, with Palestine, with ICE in the US, it's all part of this structure that's being designed to oppress, people, right? Like people have been saying, why has ICE ramped up? It's not because they're rounding up criminals, it's because they need bodies for their prisons because it's a profit system, right? Like the more people they throw into jail, the more money they make, and I think there are a lot of people who have either voted for Trump or Latinos who are sort of realizing like they're coming after you as well. They don't care about whether or not you're here legally, whether or not you have any criminal record, because veterans with no criminal record, people who have no criminal record have been thrown into, these concentration camps, because some of them have already reported, extremely horrible conditions in these camps. So I think it's really important that people understand that while it's only starting to get visible now, this has been going on since Biden, Obama, all of the other presidents before have helped elevate this. Like if no one thinks about the fact that even within America, these presidents have not stopped this. This is a direct result of them continuing the legacy, right, of colonialism, white supremacy. So, well, I'm here to, just keep educating people on how it's all connected.
And is it hubris or is it desperation of capitalism in crisis?
I think they're in crisis. I think there's a lot of people who are sort of waking up to what's going on, and so they're sort of in crisis mode of like, what do we do? Because I heard someone recently say, "Oh, well, this is how the game is played. This is the system. We have to play the game." And I just think to myself, empires have fallen before. We have this idea that empires will last forever, and I think we need to realize that's not true. So I think, yes, I think there's a sense of like a desperation that eventually, they're going to lose control because the people are going to rise up and say, we're tired of being exploited, arrested. We're tired of the control. But that's where, again, I urge people to act now, because I feel that they're confident, right? And that Palance here, they're trying to build all these systems around us to control us. And so I think we need to be really careful moving forward, right? Because even people talking about the suppression online and what is going on with the people who have been surveilled, the people even here in Puerto Rico, they're still surveilling activists. So, there's a lot to
Because
talk there.
when I lived in Scotland, this independence was sort of sold, but it was actually just a way to cover up the corruption of the Scottish leader, I guess, and this dilemma. Like, for example, if we are in revolutionary times, maybe the question is like, why not stay in the citizenship of the US, and do, so to speak, a revolutionary program with the Americans together.
Yeah, there's been referendums. So there's been many conversations over the years about, oh, how do we work within? And there's groups that are working on it. I believe they're called Bud Puerto Rico on Instagram if you want to check. They've done a lot of advocacy work. There are people who are hoping that there are ways to work within the government to give Puerto Rico its freedom and its independence, because they, in particular, are very clear that unless Puerto Ricans get a chance to decide for themselves, how are they going to survive? How are they going to stay on their own land? So I think there is that argument. I don't, again, I'm still learning. I don't know if that's the right way. There's people that talk about the corruption in Puerto Rican government is a result of the colonialism. So they say the only reason it even happens is if because of this. And so there are people who are saying maybe within the system there's a way. There are others that don't believe that's even possible because of what they've seen in the past. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see.
Do you think it makes sense to make this distinction of the US citizenship and the system? Are these two separate things?
It's interesting. I think I think the U.S. citizenship is part of a system designed to keep us within the hold of the United States, right? So I would argue my preference is always like let Puerto Ricans, of course, decide, but let Puerto Ricans govern themselves and have their own citizenship and reparations, because people say, oh, reparations is ridiculous, but it's been done. It's been done. And I think that there's a need to look at, we look at the IT, right? IT had the same situation with France, where France left, but then they took millions, billions of dollars from IT. And so I think there's a need to have that conversation of saying, if Puerto Rico does become independent, it should come with, a package of reparations for all of the
Mhm.
damage. The birth control trial they experimented on Puerto Rican women here with the birth control trial. So
When?
this was in the 1940s,
Mhm.
50s, I believe. So they did experimentation on women here in order to test this pill that eventually went global. And that's just one example of the exploitation that the US has done. It was an American
Mhm.
doctor that came here to test it out because they thought, oh, poor Black and brown women. So yes, of course we can test it here, that we won't have any issues with the ethics of testing it out without their knowledge or consent, by the way. And so that's why I say, like, there should be some kind of conversation here about reparations, about, okay, the United States came here and they've done over many decades, for over a century of harm to the community. So how do we talk about that in a way that brings, the community into focus and gives back what has been taken?
And you made a film about a white doctor being
Yes,
searched.
I'm actually I'm working on that. I'm working on a film that discusses that era, that discusses
Mm.
that time, because I think it is important. I think our storytelling, our films, the way that we decolonize is through our stories.
Well, the question for me, I don't know much, but like, is the citizenship, is that like giving people enough of a strength to do any kind of campaigning and change, or
I would argue it's not so much the citizenship. I think it's out of necessity, right? People have
yeah.
left because here you can't live here and thrive here. A lot of the jobs that are available are service industry. A lot of the issues with just the price of everything going up. So a lot of people, including my own family, when I was 2 years old, my family left. My family comes from poor barrios here in Puerto Rico, so they didn't have the resources to stay. Some have still, you could still see the disparity in class here, but my family left, and millions, 2/3 of Puerto Ricans now live in the United States because they can't live here. And so the US citizenship has been almost like used as designed to
Mhm.
displace. But however, the Puerto Ricans that are out there have never stopped thinking about ways to help Puerto Rico. So when you think about, in recent days, right, like I said, the campaign to help bring awareness is very present across organizations. But even back in the 1970s, the Young Lords movement in New
Mhm.
York and Chicago, starting in Chicago and then also in New York, the Young Lords movement was all about bringing attention. So I think it's not that the citizenship helps, it's that it's been used to push us out. And as a result, the people that are now in the United States are using what resources that they can get within the empire to say, okay, well, now we're realizing what they're doing. Let's help our communities here on the island amplify the issues and bring awareness and bring them help, and bring them the necessary, tools that they need.
I think in one of your videos you said something about identity. Was that like, is identity confused? Um,
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. It really is interesting because I've gotten a lot of comments on just that. I think the identity issue is really around the fact that for many, many decades, the United States has had a campaign to assimilate us. So when you think about in the very beginning, what they did in Puerto Rico is they started these English only schools, right? They started to push English only. It didn't work. So thankfully, we only speak Spanish here. I speak English because I was raised outside, and people here speak English. They can speak any language, but I think it's really important to say that they attempted to make English only here, and they attempted to assimilate people. And so as a result, as pushing people out of the island, people like me grew up not knowing the history. I didn't know my history. There's millions of people, millions of children that did not learn Puerto Rican history and didn't understand the colonial aspect. And so for them, they think of themselves as American, and I'm not going to say whether that's wrong or right. For me, it was wrong because I was 2 years old. I was displaced. So for me, it frustrates me because I just felt so betrayed by the lie that, oh, we're also American citizens, but they only did that for them to exploit and bring people into war. So in that case, I don't feel that my American citizenship makes me better than anyone. It doesn't make me more American. If anything, I'm more proud of my history now, knowing that, to say I'm Puerto Rican and that's it. I don't see myself in that same way. But there is that identity issue because I come back here and there is a cultural difference because I grew up with the American culture. So I have to unlearn, and I have to acknowledge some of my biases. I have to acknowledge some of the ways that I think can be a certain way. And here culturally things are different. And so, there's been this conversation for a long time about, are we different if we get raised over there versus raised on the island? And I want to argue that that's just been used to divide us because we are one community that has been affected by colonialism.
So what does identity stand in the way of? Like,
I think it stands in the way because there's this conversation that attempts to, like, for me, it's almost like I think we need to realize that we don't need to assimilate, right? People feel strongly that we need to assimilate or become a state within the US, but Bad Bunny did a great job mentioning Hawaii, right? They forced statehood onto Hawaii. They took their queen, they forced her to sign over. And so I think it's so important for us to realize that, identity should not, the fact that we were raised in the US should not stop us from fighting for what is right, which is to give Puerto Rico its own independence, its own freedom. I think that that's at the core of it, how I feel.
And why was Puerto Rico given American citizenship?
So they were given a citizenship because I believe it was World War One it's one of World War One or two. I forget, but they needed to draft more men into war. So they said, okay, let's pass this law that allows Puerto Ricans to have U.S. citizenship, and as a result of having U.S. citizenship, now we can draft them. And I think that that's something people don't realize. How can we applaud the U.S. citizenship when it was used to just take people and put them into war? How they're only using us as tools rather than giving us something out of the kindness of their heart, right? So I think it's important to know.
And if your country was, or if Puerto Rico was offered to be part of the Union,
I think that a lot of people would really fight that. I think that now, when you look at the last election, there was a third party candidate that advocated for independence and freedom for the island, and he was almost won. He almost won, and people say, there doesn't seem to have been much of a movement, and the reason for that is because of the repression. When you think of COINTELPRO, when you think of all of the the CIA, FBI, the repression that they had on Puerto Ricans and just anyone, that they called radical. That's the reason a lot of people, even my own mother, would be scared to even talk about independence. So I think that for me, the key thing to understand is that people are sort of waking up right now to the need for Puerto Ricans to have their own country, and just the very idea that we can't govern ourselves, I feel, is racist. I feel like it's like, how can you say that we who make up a broad group of people, brilliant scientists, brilliant policymakers, there's so much talent and brilliance within the Puerto Rican community, that to say that we cannot govern ourselves, I think is ridiculous. So I try to tell people, like, yeah, statehood isn't going to solve our problems. If anything, it's going to, if statehood did become a thing, that many have argued that it would further displace Puerto Ricans and it would bring more white Americans in, because if you look at Hawaii, the same thing happened. They brought in a lot of foreigners, and there's many Hawaiians who are either displaced into the
Mhm.
United States or they're homeless. And so we have to understand that statehood, becoming a state, becoming part of the union is not going to solve anything. It's going to make it worse.
And the parallels to other places, Ireland, Palestine.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I was looking into the connection with Ireland and seeing how even Pedro Albizu Campos, he met some of the Irish, future Irish leaders when he was at Harvard University, and he advocated for Ireland to be free as well. So there is parallels in terms of the fight and the parallels in terms of the struggle historically. I think with Palestine, many people have been talking about the fact that the weapons that were tested in Vieques, the bombs tested in Vieques ended up being used in Palestine. People don't know that. They also don't know that right now, as the escalation of Venezuela, this fake war is happening, they're bringing in the warships that were once over in Palestine that were being used over there. So a lot of the resources and the infrastructure they're using in Palestine is being brought here to fight Venezuela.
Yeah. And when you make films, do you also do documentary?
I haven't done a documentary yet. I think I have a few friends who are thinking about making that. So I think I'm going to jump on to do something like that very soon. It definitely would help, because right now in this moment, we do have to document these things and we do have to talk about these things. So I think it would be really powerful if we worked on that. Yeah.
And what gives you energy from the fictional films? Or are they fictional or historical films?
Yeah, I would say they're
Oh,
they're mixed. They're a mix of
yeah,
fictional. Some is fictional, some is historical. But I think what it does is just it reminds me that we have this power of storytelling. That will help our communities be able to feel seen, not just represented, but to feel that they have the ability to act as well. That
yeah,
these are things of the past, but we have a community of fighters. We come from a lineage of resistance. We can also be part of that, that movement. So I hope it just inspires people. That's really, at the end of it, I want people to feel connected, in ways that maybe they didn't in the past.
Do you still have time for a question?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, do we get learn to enjoy our suffering when we learn to resist?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, I think that I've done many memes in my podcast that talk about decolonizing is a mix of like I can't, it's a mix of suffering, but it's also a mix of joy because we are finally understanding and embracing who we are. And when you do that, when you feel whole, right? Because going back to identity, a lot of times we feel fractured in terms of who we are, but when we can acknowledge the pain and acknowledge what has happened before, we feel more whole. We feel more of this, like you said, the strength to move on and to fight for our communities. Because I think, when I started the podcast, it was about 6 months after Huracán Maria hit Puerto Rico.
Mm.
And after those 2 months, my stepdad, who had heart conditions, he passed away. And I came back to the island to see all of this destruction, to go through this heartache. But I remember at his funeral, I said to myself, I'm not going to let his death go to waste. I'm not going to just give up, right? Like, oh no, this happened and we can't do anything. And so I started the podcast as a way to learn my history, but also connect with people, to know how I can help, to figure out how do I tell these stories that are so important. Because even in the pain, I acknowledge that it's not just about me, it's about my community. And how can we build something together and create solidarity across all the struggles, Palestine and Sudan and Congo, and how do we bring people together? And that in the end, I'm really happy that I continue to do the work, because now I'm seeing more and more people, even though it is tough to decolonize and it is suffering, but there's also an aspect of it of community and joy and resisting.
And the death of your stepfather, was it related to your own death in your how you think about death?
Yeah, in terms of how I think about so sorry, say that question again. I don't think I
So,
understood.
so was this injury that you felt from his death making you resist in a different way?
Yeah, no, so his death was what really showed me that, you know, a lot of people in the diaspora, Puerto Ricans like me who lived out of the island, we felt helpless. We felt that we didn't know the history, we didn't know what was going on, and so it felt to a certain extent I blamed myself because I felt like, "Why didn't I know this? Why didn't I come back sooner? Why didn't I find a way to help save him?" Right? And there was, you could argue there was no way to save him, but, it basically showed us that this death means we need to connect more. We need to realize who we are. We need to help the communities here, and not because they need saving. There are many organizations here that have been doing the work for many years. I want to
Mm.
acknowledge that there are some amazing individuals, activists here on the island who've been doing the work. But how do we help amplify? How do we help be part of that? Because his death, what it showed me too, is that the United States withheld funding, withheld supplies. People, the Puerto Rican government hid water and food for months. They found food and water months, years later that had been hidden in a warehouse that had not been distributed. And in that injustice, I said, "Oh no, we cannot." So his death and the death of thousands of others that happened here, because when you look at the hurricane killed about
Mm.
4,655 people. But in recent the recent Melissa, I don't think it reached to even 1,000, if I'm not
Mm.
mistaken. So you see the disparity. You see what happens when we let the United States, own us, and what the tragedy that leads to that, because they were not here when tragedy struck. They did not help the Puerto Rican people, and thousands died because of it.
And why did they hide it? Maybe.
So that's the question. Did they hide
Mm.
it themselves? Did they keep it so that they could give it to their own? I personally, obviously, we don't have the answers, but I felt it was very sinister. To me, why would you hide? It was a whole warehouse. When you look at the pictures, it was so many supplies that it wouldn't even make sense for them to hold it for their own families. It was so much. So why hold it from people that needed water?
And
Why hold it from communities?
and when people resist, they get so much out of that. It's like they don't worry even about their own health, because they know this is life is real, and you have to act as if it's real.
Oh, yeah. I agree. Yeah, I think that one of the things I realized in learning about the history of the resistance fighters is that many of them felt that it was almost like a calling for them. They felt that, in the case of Pedro Albizu Campos, he was very spiritual about it. He said, "We have a right, a birthright, that God gave us the right to be free." And in other cases, there are people in more recent days that I've listened to that say, "I just feel that unless I fight, what will I leave behind for my family? What future will we have here? If I don't fight now, we may not have any more Puerto Ricans on the island if we continue along this line of displacement." So,
And also it makes us think differently about parenthood, like because our children are already much better at resisting. We will never catch up, right? So they don't want us to be just safe. Now they want us to have a voice.
yes, I agree.
um, yeah. uh, do you still have time?
Yeah, anything
Uh,
else you wanted to ask?
yeah, like the um yeah, Walter Benjamin said about alienation that um, we have learned to enjoy our destruction and embrace it. Um, but I guess resistance breaks that open, right?
Yeah. No, definitely. Yeah, I think it's interesting the conversation here around the way people have just, "Oh, how come no one has done anything? How come this crisis of public health, right? Let's talk about public health again. It's like the hospitals closing, the doctors leaving the island because there's no work, there's no money. Um, People have said, well, if every if there's so much destruction, if there's so much going wrong, why do people not do something? And I want to argue that people have been doing things here in the island, but I think it takes a tipping point, right? Like when I think about any movement, there's always a tipping point where when is too much too much? When do we go off the deep end in terms of like now we're seeing, an uptick in more people being aware. We're seeing, and not just in Puerto Rico, I think like across the world, people are noticing that there's this this system, I say the system because but it's too abstract. I think we need to realize that like the disparity in the class and the top down, I think that's, people have said like we need to focus on that a little bit more and understand that like we're all here because there are people with a lot of money and power at the
Mm.
top who are controlling us. And when I saw the Trump the inauguration, and I saw all of these, CEOs and wealthy rich men, parading in front of us like peacocks, I just thought to myself, they they know what they're doing. They're the ones in power. They don't have any fear anymore. Before, it
Mm.
felt like all of it was done in the background. Like we didn't know what was going on because they're doing all these things. They were doing all these things in the background to control social media, when you look at Facebook and things like that. But I think now people are realizing, and I'm hoping, right, that people are able to kind of be more critical about what they're doing, and to understand that that's going to involve us, pushing back against their narrative and pushing back against what they've built and break it down. Because right now, the only thing I see is more control and more suffering if we continue down this line. So
And the image of the inauguration also shows the compulsion of the system. They have to be at that table, right? Like,
yeah.
even though they hated some of them.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It does show that they're willing to find that common ground, right, in order for their own interests to move forward. Yeah.
And what's the ethics of your filmmaking? Like, I don't mean like in theory, but just what do you discover about yourself when you make the film? Like, when what I learned from my Palestinian journalist colleagues here in Berlin at the police violence when they film, is that you have to show almost everything. Like, um, I I'm really they say the camera is like a weapon. They don't mean this in a terrorism way or anything.
No,
It's
I
just
understand that it's a weapon in the sense that it's showing something that the system doesn't want you to see. That people, we've been living under this propaganda for so long that when people see something that is counter to what they've been raised to believe, it's a shock. So in that sense, it
mm,
is it is a weapon because it's breaking through the wall, right? The facade that has been created. And I would say the same thing for us here. When it comes to films, it's about showing a history that for a long time was manipulated for their ends. It was manipulated to make the US look like the savior, to make them look like the good guys. And so for me, in terms of making the films, it is about that. It is about breaking the veil, but it's also about showing what we're capable of. A lot of times we've been, and especially in films, we've been seen in a negative light, or in a condescending way. They've talked about Puerto Ricans, and still do talk about Puerto Ricans in such a condescending, negative way. But I want us to show what we're capable of. I want us to see ourselves as people who are empowered, as people who are capable, as people who are brilliant. And so it's about changing that narrative. And like you said, that in itself is a weapon, because that's going counter to what society wants us to believe.
and do you find yourself not do you sort of through the making the films, do you discover something about how you tick? Like, do the films have a common theme, like death, like grief, like the injury that liberates us?
Yeah, I
Um,
definitely think that it's definitely been more about, when you look at Nuevo Rico, it is about that discovery of colonization and how negative it can be. With Yemaya, it was about death, so I very much connected to that one because it was about returning back and finding that spiritual connection after death with your family, with the ancestry. And so I felt like the themes have always been about family, about love, about death, about finding ourselves, because I felt very lost, I would say. When I think about, the younger me, I think about how lost I felt, how I always felt confused, not just in identity, but in trying to understand myself. And I think these films are about that connection to your history and also to self in ways that, I think just were not available to me. So I think I've seen a lot of people in filmmaking too, like how we can make art that connects people and touches people and make us feel something.
mm, yeah, like w- sort of when you say spiritual, the um ex- ex- experience the aliveness of the Palestine demos, the community here. Um, it, I guess it's the closest for me I come to imagine what people mean by spiritual. It's like I don't idealize the Palestine community. I'm just saying like
Yeah.
I do believe that we can never overcome our alienation, but that for example resistance is bringing people together is where like the spirit is and comes alive, where the community comes alive. Um, so
Yeah.
like
Absolutely.
why do we not why did I not have that with the other leftist movements in Germany? Like, are we all colonized?
Who knows? Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, no, there is something I will say in terms of Palestine, there is something so wow, so spiritually connected when it comes to that. I've seen that as well, not just here, but when I hear people talk about Palestine, when I hear Palestinian activists speak, the poetry with which they speak, and the that sense of I think they've experienced some of the most extreme, with the bombings and the amount of bombings, the toxic environment that they're living in terms of like the bombs that have been thrown on the land, and just over the years, the decades of just repression. I think there's something about it that just we connect with because it's so painful, right? And the suffering is so deep. But also that sense of like how they resist despite all of that. They have not given up, and there's something about that is so intrinsically human, right? That no matter what, we will fight on for our people, for our tribe, for what's right. So I just, yeah, I know what you mean. I definitely.
And Germany just installed the Iron Dome that they bought from Israel, and here nobody cares, like as if that's not a huge escalation of an arms race with Russia and China. And and so what I mean is that um are we all colonized here? I mean, we are the colonizers here, but like we are the heart of the empire, but we don't know it. Like the people here don't know that.
Yeah. Oh no, that's actually another case, right? When you talk about how the people, the German people aren't doing anything for that. The same
Mm,
thing here with the bases, right? You would think
mm,
that people would say, "Wait, this is going to cause a lot of harm
mm.
here," and yet people don't move. What is that? Why is that? And so I think that's definitely why, I was really glad you invited me to talk. So we could, hey, people, wake up a little bit, and let's because maybe it's just a conversation they're not hearing. I don't know.
Maybe we can never imagine ourselves as being at the center of the story.
True. That's true.
And how did your alienation change then over the years into a sort of less destructive alienation or a more productive one?
Yeah, I think, well, it's it's interesting. I've been coming back and forth. When I was little, I used to come back and forth and see my family here. And my grandmother, who passed away about a month, 2 months ago, she never made me feel that I was not Puerto Rican, right? And
Mm.
so I'm so grateful to her and to my family here who always made me feel that no matter where I am, I'm always from here. This is where I'm from. But yeah, over the years, I would say I felt very alienated as a kid. But then I would say around college time, I started to feel a little more connected. My mother says that I was the only one of the three. I'm one of three girls. I'm the eldest. I was the only one that wanted to know more about being from here. The other two, they they did not. They are fully on that.
On that.
They don't think about they don't think about it. They don't think about the colonialism. Even when I talk to them a little bit about it, they don't really think about it. I was the only one that said, what is wrong with what is going on? I was the only one that kind of was critical thinker in terms of like, is there is there a reason that I feel strangely? Like, is there a reason that I don't feel I fit in? And so I think that over the years that sort of helped me build that bridge closer to the island. And then after Maria and spending more time here with people, I think it's only been community that has helped me feel more connected and has helped me sort of forgive myself too, because I think for a lot of us, we're just sort of like, how come I didn't see this before? And we blame ourselves. We blame our way of speaking Spanish, for example.
Mm.
But I think it's an unlearning and it's a forgiving of yourself, and that has helped me feel a little bit more whole. I think it's going to be an ongoing thing, but I think I've never felt today I could say I've never felt more connected to my roots than I do now. And I think a part of that is just like because I do the work, because I'm trying to unlearn, because I'm also trying to build community by making a podcast that's educates people, motivates people, inspires, that shares history, it shares culture, it shares, things that people have never seen before. And so that brings me a sense of joy and in that resistance. Yeah.
Yes, and it's astonishing that you are not more exhausted because, y you know, our voices right now seem to be quite important. Not, I don't mean like this as a self praise. I just mean like, um, this is a time of huge shift and change, and like, and that's exhausting a lot of us, like, because this accelerationism, seeing the empire sort of fall apart and at the same time thrive the more it rots. It's like it's like the same shift you can see that people don't trust the news and they go to social media. And you have like so many followers, and it must be exhausting um because it's everything counts. Like it's about not life and death every day, but it's about a lot.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, it definitely is exhausting. I would I would say that I've had to take small breaks, because even like you said, even when you take a short break, you feel like, "Oh, no, I could be missing out on sharing something important with the community that needs to hear about it." And so, I take my little breaks here and there where I can, but I think that what I've learned as well over time is that to lean on community. So there have been people who have been reaching out and saying like, "How can I help you? How can I share?" People who are offering to help share it more. YouTube is another place that I've been trying to make more live streams there. In the next month in January, I'm going to try to live stream every week. So you're welcome to join me if you ever want to join
Right,
me on YouTube
for
live,
sure.
and we can talk and then talk
Yeah.
also about because yes, of course I want to focus on Puerto Rico, but I want to know what's happening there. When you mentioned the dome, when you mentioned the work you're doing, I want to know what's happening there too. So my hope is that it is exhausting, but if we continue and we keep building, like you said, independent media is the way right now. People are seeing that that's the only way to get real news and to get real, facts on what's happening on the ground. And so I'm hopeful that people will see the work that you're doing, that I'm doing, and will say, let's invest instead of investing in these corporations. Let's boycott these major. I'm glad I saw people boycotting Starbucks, for example. Let's put that money into people. Let's put that money into the community. And so, along with, doing the podcast, I did a merch store so that I can get more people to, just I have this shirt called "Deport the Colonizer." I don't know if you could see it. It's just things that will help motivate people, inspire people to get out there, to protest, to build that system within their own that supports each other. Because again, like you said, if things continue the way they are, we are going to have to lean our community. And so yeah, I hope that people who watch this will remember that a lot of the work that we're doing is exhausting, and it requires not just emotional but actual physical time to do all of these things that they'll support. Yeah, because we do need that support.
Yeah, but I'm not really exhausted at all in considering that I'm trying to stop a genocide. It's like
Yeah,
I'm
that part is not exhausting. No, exactly.
uh,
I think when I say exhausting, I mean more just especially the emotional. Because when I see
mm,
things like, for example, there was an abuelita, a grandmother with cancer who was being
mm,
displaced. I saw recently they gave her an eviction notice, even though her family has lived on the land for over 100 years.
mm,
They're trying to evict her, and so in the sense, it's exhausting to see these things because it's sad. It brings us down, but in terms of the fight itself, I'm not,
mm.
when people say like, how do you find the strength despite all of the horrible things you read or the things you see? And I say, if, if we see Palestine, they've had to go through thousands of times more worse things than we have, and they continue to fight. And so we have to build that strength in ourselves, in our communities, and to just, despite any exhaustion or emotional exhaustion, mental exhaustion, we have to push through because it's
And
it's important.
and that's how I meant it. It's like
Yeah.
I don't. It sounds really unlikable to say I'm not exhausted, but what I mean is that yes, we are winning a lot of small invisible wins. For
Yeah.
example, for press freedom, like
Yes.
there's we are constantly winning for press freedom by asserting our rights. What do you think about like um sort of some of the right getting their head around imperialism.
That's a great question.
And be very careful what you say. Like, we don't want to annoy people too much.
That's really interesting. So I'll start with one documentary someone shared with me. I forget the name of this documentary. Maybe you might remember. It's a woman who is Muslim, and she's interviewing the far right here in the she was in the US, and she's interviewing the leaders of the white nationalist movement and people who are part of the KKK. I don't know if you've seen this documentary, but she's doing interviews with them and asking them, I'm a Muslim woman, what do you think of me? And in those conversations, she starts to break it down for them in a way that, because this is why I thought it was really important. She does that one-on-one. So sometimes I love that we can share education but I think a lot of the questions that we ask one-on-one is what's going to get them to realize that something is wrong, right? Because she was saying in her story that one of the nationalists, one of the white nationalists, ended up removing himself from the movement because after speaking with her and seeing her and talking to her and realizing what he was saying to her and how terrible it was and how she felt and then how he felt from that, it caused him to like break from that mentality. And so when I think about, at least, I can only speak about like Puerto Rico too in terms of like my personal experiences. I've seen people here who are blaming the so-called leftists. Oh, the leftists are saying this or doing that. And it's so, I get that initial like, wow, like you've been so brainwashed that you think that the right is going to save you, even though you're a woman of color, even though you're, they would throw you in jail too. They would throw you in jail. And she's someone with young kids. And I think to myself, what are some ways that we can reach those people? And I think the only way, or I won't say the only way, but I think one of the ways is having that. The documentaries are great. I think the one-on-one conversation is great. But there are a lot of people who are so caught up in this framework because of what they've seen throughout their childhood, maybe, Because again, I always say it's a learned behavior. Hate is a learned behavior, and so we can unlearn it, right?
And do we learn hate to not feel small? Um,
I think it's to not feel small maybe is one, but I also wonder if it's to feel like you're part of a community, because when I think about here, right, I think, oh, there's some people who so badly want to be American, and now I cringe because I was over there and I was the American, and all I felt was hate. All I felt was
mm,
discrimination. So even when I assimilated, right? Like I have curly hair,
mm,
this big I used to straighten my hair. I used to wear these blue contacts. I used to try to be the perfect minority for them at the time, right? The perfect, I am now like you, but none of that made me fit in. None of that made me digestible to them. They still saw me as other. And so I think for a lot of, at least for Latinos and for those who are stuck to this idea that it's about this feeling of being accepted somehow, because their whole lives they're treated as less than. They want to feel on even ground. They want to feel as equal, but they're not going to do that by aligning themselves with hate. I think that's the thing that, yeah. So I don't have the answers, but that's how
uh,
I see it.
I guess that's why we can beat people with kindness, like because because if they do feel a bit small behind the hate, they don't know how to respond to the kindness.
I agree. Yeah, I think that they need to see themselves reflected. They need to see that we're not judging them. I think that's been something I've thought of too. I've thought that there's been a lot of people who just get angry with those people and then say things, but I think the only way that we have to have a conversation. We have to show them, like, this is about your community. This is about the people you love. With her, I thought to myself, what kind of future do you want to leave your child? Will your child be able to live here? Maybe not. So it's having those conversations. Yeah. I hope.
Yes. And what time is your podcast AST time?
So I
Your
try to
life, your life.
so I'm trying to do my podcast every week. I'm trying to figure out the best day and time. So maybe
Mm.
maybe you can help me with that. No, this is a good time. 9 a.m. Puerto Rico time is not a bad time to
Mm.
do it. And I think like later, like this is a good Fridays. Maybe I'll keep this time. I'll do it at this time.
And
Do
and
it.
who and who are you too shy to ask onto the podcast?
Wait, what was that?
Who are you too shy to ask to come onto the podcast,
Who would I ask onto the podcast? That's a good question.
or too
Um.
shy to ask? Yeah.
Oh. Hmm. Who would I be too shy to ask? I don't know. I'm very open. I'm a very daring person. So, when we talk about filmmaking, a lot of people are like, "How did you make these films? It seems impossible." Because I ask. I'm very much I'll say, "Hey, by the way, do you want to be on my podcast?" I don't mind. I don't mind because I used to be shy, but then I think somewhere along the line I said, if I don't take the risk, then I'll never know. So
Yeah, because rejection doesn't matter if you are resisting. It's like it's not a category anymore.
exactly. Well, thank you so much. I'm really
Thank
glad
you.
I had a chance to do this.
Well, I will post it, and you can post whatever you like.
Absolutely, I will.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.